working Psalm 44. Traditionally, Psalm 44 is used to overcome any intolerable situation and also for protection from assault. I want to use Psalm 44 today to dissolve any intolerable situation, any negative situation that you might find yourself in. We can use Psalm 44 to just dissolve that. The way that we work Psalm magic is very simple and very effective. We take the psalm that we're working and we speak it out loud all the way through once without stopping. We call this an incantation. Then we take that same psalm and we go back through it and consider each verse in turn. And we try to find hidden meanings or occult meanings within each of those verses. As we do that, we try to also apply whatever we find there to whatever the situation is that we brought to the psalm. And by doing all of that, we are taking these magic seeds that we discover and planting them in the depths of our minds, where they in turn take root, grow, blossom forth, and then bear fruit after their kind. And that's exactly what you and I are going to do together right now with Psalm 44. We have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us what work thou didst in their days, in the times of old. How thou didst drive out the heathen with thy hand, and plant'st them. How thou didst afflict the people, and cast them out. For they got not the land in possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them, but thy right hand and thine arm, and the light of thy countenance, because thou hadst a favor unto them. Thou art my king, O God, command deliverances for Jacob. Through thee will we push down our enemies, through thy name will we tread them under that rise up against us. For I will not trust in my bow, neither shall my sword save me. But thou hast saved us from our enemies. Thou hast put them to shame that hated us. In God we boast all the day long, and praise thy name forever, Selah. But thou hast cast off and put us to shame, and goest not forth with our armies. Thou makest us to turn back from the enemy, and they which hate us spoil for themselves. Thou hast given us like sheep appointed for meat. Thou hast scattered us amongst the heathen. Thou sellest thy people for naught, and dost not increase thy wealth by their price. Thou makest us a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and a derision to them that are round about us. Thou makest a byword amongst the heathen, a shaking of the head among the people. My confusion is continually before me, and the shame of my face hath covered me. For the voice of him that reproacheth and blasphemeth, by reason of the enemy and avenger. All this is come upon us, yet we have not forgotten thee, neither have we dealt falsely in thy covenant. Our heart is not turned back, neither have our steps declined from the way. Though thou hast sore broken us in the place of dragons, and covered us with the shadow of death. If we have forgotten the name of God, or stretched out our hands to a strange God, shall not God search this out? For he knoweth the secrets of the heart. Yea, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Awake, why thou sleepest, O Lord? Arise, cast us off not forever. Wherefore hiddest thou thy face, and forgottest our affliction and our oppression? For our soul is bowed down to the dust, our belly cleaveth to the earth. Arise for our help, and redeem us for thy mercy's sake. Just recognize the power of a lament like this. Sometimes people misunderstand what these laments do and how powerful they are, because that's how we heal anything, by going through it, not by avoiding it, not by trying to go around it. But by going through it, you actually deliver yourself from it. You actually feel the pain leaving you. So it's not painful to go through these things. It's painful not to go through these things. In order to heal it, you must experience it. This is an Elohist psalm, so that means that we are speaking to the Elohim. And for psalm magic, it doesn't really make that big of a difference which you are approaching, whether it's Elohim or the Tetragrammaton. However, it is worthy to note that the Elohim really means a collective. It really is the angelic host, the heavenly host. It is God as a collective, as a unity, rather than as a deity. It starts off with, "We have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us what work thou didst in their days, in the times of old." There's never been a time when infinite intelligence or God has not been available to us to undo any wrong, to heal any problem. And can use this not only to say, yeah, I can look back and listen to stories of miracles, but you can look back within your own life and you can think of all the times that you've gotten through something. How thou didst drive out the heathen with thy hand and plantest them. How thou didst afflict the people and cast them out. And that's exactly what we are asking for. Now, I know that when you're going through a rough situation, you just want God to blast the situation and leave you out of it. That would be so nice. You just take care of the situation. I don't want to work on anything within myself. That has just nothing to do with me. I'm just standing here minding my own business and all this stuff happened to me. To drive out the heathen with God's hand and afflict the people and cast them out, we're talking about the thoughts within our mind that are at the very least allowing these things to stay. Maybe you're not at the point where you want to say you created these problems. That's fine. Maybe you didn't. But there's a part of you, there's a part of your mind that's hanging on to them, that's anchoring them, that's keeping them in place. Now, it may be that 99% of the problem is not anything to do with you, but that 1% is everything. Because if you can get rid of the 1% that is anchored in your mind, then that situation has no way to tether itself to you. And that's what we want. Remember that in the Psalms, the heathen are your thought forms that are self-destructive, at odds with your good. For they got not the land in possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them, but thy right hand and thine arm and the light of thy countenance, because thou hadst favor unto them. In other words, I don't know how to do this by myself. I can't do this all by myself. If I could do this by myself, it would have been done. That's really important to know. If you knew how to dissolve this problem yourself, you wouldn't be doing this spell. So it's important to recognize that when you're calling on the infinite, when you're calling on God, when you're calling on infinite intelligence to do this for you, you must allow yourself to relinquish everything that is your control in it. You obviously are not the solution here, or you would already be experiencing the solution. So therefore, you're part of the problem. Noticing that you're part of the problem is very powerful, because then you can let infinite intelligence heal it. Thou art my king, O God. Command deliverances for Jacob. Now, Jacob is an important figure in the Bible, but only to the degree that you understand that's you. You are Jacob. And since Jacob recognized God as Jacob's king, no matter what he went through, and he went through all kinds of problems that were just awful. And if you look into those stories very clearly, he was responsible for the bulk of those problems himself. But God didn't hold any of it against him. God didn't say, I don't know what to tell you. You got to live with it. That's not God's response to Jacob, and therefore that's not God's response to you. God's response is, I'll handle it. I've got this. I've got you. You're fine, you're good. But you can't have it both ways. You have to allow yourself to take responsibility for your investment, whatever it is, and whatever thought forms within you that helped create this problem. You have to allow yourself to let go of those things. You want to be wrong about yourself here. You don't want to be right. You don't want to be defensive right now. This is not the time to be defensive. Through thee will we push down our enemies. Through thy name will we tread them under that rise up against us. Whatever this problem is, through the name of God, you will be free. The name of God is the nature of God. What that means is simply that you are no longer going to be obsessing about the problem. You are going to turn and start obsessing about the solution. And the solution is the name of God. So where you were thinking, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Oh. Instead of that, you're thinking, infinite intelligence. Wow, what is that? Infinite love. Now, what is God's love? How all-encompassing is God? How much am I loved? You're thinking of the different qualities of God instead of your problem. That's the name of God. Infinite spirit. Spirit is that which cannot be destroyed. And that's God. And since I'm an extension of God, my soul can't be destroyed. I'm invincible too. Those kinds of thoughts are supplanting your worries about the problem, pushing down your enemies. It's through God's name that you're doing it. For I will not trust in my bow, neither shall my sword save me. You can't fix this yourself. You've already determined that. If you could, you would. If you could do it, you would have done it. So if you've got a problem, banging your head against the wall and saying, I'm going to try to attack it again, and then I'll try to attack it again, and I'm going to try to kill this problem and kill that problem, never seems to be working for this. So you have to tell the truth about that it's not through your own defensiveness that you're going to be able to overcome this. It's through your joining with the infinite. You're joining with that infinite power. Because remember, what is God? God is simply the idea of unlimited good, infinite good. And since there's only one infinite, you can't have two infinites. The infinite can't be divided. There's only infinity. And since there's only one infinity, there's nothing that can oppose it. And so if you're joining with this infinite power, then your success is inevitable. But if you're trying to attack it all by yourself with your finite little sword or your finite little bow, you're just going to keep getting more of the same. Aren't you bored? So now it's time to return to the true magic. And that is, I'm going to turn away from the thoughts that are creating this problem and or keeping this problem in place. And instead of trying to fight against it myself, I'm going to turn to the infinite and I'm going to consider the names of God in place of this problem. But thou hast saved us from our enemies and hast put them to shame that hated us. It's already happened. Your enemies and them that hated you are those thought forms. Even though it may appear in the world that it's this person or that situation or this government or this company, those are manifestations of invisible principles. And those invisible principles are those invisible enemies that shame you. And those are all within your mind. But you've already been saved from those. You've already been saved from those. I'm sorry, not that to shame you, that hated you. So those thought forms that are your enemies and that hate you have already been, it says, put to shame. In the Psalms, when it says that something is put to shame, it means there's a scarlet letter on it. There's a little sign on it. So that when you are tempted to go back to those thought forms again, you remember what they are. And you say, oh, I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to do that one again. I'm not going to think like that anymore. So you want infinite intelligence to shame those thoughts in that you want to be reminded not to go down those roads again in your mind. In God we boast all the day long and praise thy name forever, Selah. All the day long. That's all you do. That's all you have to do with your mind, is to think about the qualities of God, the qualities of the divine. That's all you focus on. I know that sounds impossible, but it's not. Because anytime you notice yourself thinking about the problem, you just gently reorient yourself and start thinking about God instead. And you'll notice that as you do that, very little is required of you other than that. And you're safely delivered from your problem. That problem just dissolves itself in one way or another. I'm going to take a few of these at once because they're all repeating the same idea. Thou hast cast off and put us to shame, and goest not forth with our armies. Thou makest us to turn back from the enemy, and they which hate us spoil for themselves. Thou hast given us like sheep appointed for meat. Thou hast scattered us among the heathen. Thou sellest thy people for naught, and thou dost not increase thy wealth for their price. Thou makest us a reproach to our neighbors, and a scorn and a derision to them that are round about us. Thou makest a byword among the heathen, a shaking of the head among the people. It's really important to understand that we blame God for these things, and that's what keeps us in problem. No, you may not use the word God. You may not use the word infinite. You may have another word for it. But at some point, in order to be freed from whatever this problem is, you have to recognize that it's not God's will. Stop bitching to God about what God's doing wrong. This is not God's will. And God is nothing but patient, waiting for you to make a new choice, because God can't force you. God can't force you to think thoughts that you don't feel like thinking. And if you're going to think that God's punishing you, or God's doing this to you, or somehow you're being victimized by the universe and that you're this innocent victim that has no part in the problem, you can do that. You are free to do that. You have all the liberty in the world to do that. But while you're doing that, you are stuck with those thoughts and with those realities. Once you come to the realization that it's not God's will that any of this be done, that you go through any of this, and God's not doing this to you, God's not testing you, God's not tormenting you, God's not mad at you, God's not punishing you. Once you get that, then you can start returning your mind to the qualities of God. Because why would you turn to God to deliver you from something that you think God is doing to you? You have to reason that out in your mind, and you have to come to the realization that this is not God's will. If it's not to your happiness, your health, your prosperity, and your peace of mind, then God doesn't will it. My confusion is continually before me, and the shame of my face hath covered me. This is telling you what the problem is. You're confused, and you're ashamed. When you feel confused and you feel guilty and ashamed, you can bet your bottom dollar that your circumstances are going to come reflect that for you. And that's not to torment you, that's to alert you. You can start thinking about your physical universe. Even if you don't believe it, it's still a wonderful context to try. That your physical universe is simply there to help you notice what you're thinking. Because our thoughts are very difficult to understand by themselves, because there's so many of them. So many of them are below the surface too. But your circumstances, if they truly reflect your mind, then they're doing you a service by showing what you're thinking. Now, a lot of metaphysicians say, then it's up to me to go through and find those thoughts and choose new thoughts. And there is some benefit in doing that. But if you're doing psalm magic, none of that's necessary. If you're doing psalm magic, you can just turn to the name of God, replacing all of your other thoughts for you. Remember what the name of God is, the qualities of the infinite. For the voice of him that reproacheth and blasphemeth by reason of the enemy and the avenger. It's really easy to project onto externals the idea of the reproaching and blaspheming enemy and avenger. But that's you. That's you. And this is a little bit of a tough love psalm. And a lot of people don't like it because they don't want to feel responsible for anything that's going on in their life. They want to feel like they are completely victimized. And you can. And we're not saying that there aren't victims in the world. But like I said, even if it's only 1%, that's what you have power over, is what your part is. So you're being asked to look at yourself as a blasphemer and as an enemy and as an avenger, not your soul, but your thought forms. And so we're asking to have these things brought up so that they can be removed. To blaspheme is to desecrate and denigrate the name of God. What's the name of God? The qualities of God. If you're denigrating the qualities of God, that means that you're not contemplating those qualities. You're thinking of God as other names, as other qualities than what are true. God's not a mean deity. God's not a vengeful deity. God is the source of all life, that which is infinite. Let's think of those qualities. Let's think of those names of God real quick. Infinite life. The fact that your heart is beating, that's God. And what goes on after your body dies and you still live, that's God. Infinite soul. You are an extension of pure love, pure light. You are a star, literally. You are a star in heaven. That's your soul. You and God are not separated. You are one. And you're like a beam of light from a star. And that's who you are. You're infinite spirit. God cannot be destroyed because God's spirit. But you are a spirit. You're not a body. You have a body, but you're not one. And who you are as a true body of light has nothing to do with a corruptible body. So there's nothing that can harm you. As a spirit, nothing. Somebody that tries to harm a spirit gets very frustrated because it's like throwing a rock at the sun and wondering why it didn't hurt it. You are completely unassailable as a spirit because you are as God. A dog doesn't give birth to a monkey. God didn't create something that's not godly when God created you. Infinite intelligence knows all, has all knowledge about every little thing. Omniscience, complete and utter omniscience. And that same genius mind is part of you. Infinite truth, divine truth. This is the truth of God. That means that nothing but truth exists in God, and any lie cannot exist in the presence of God. So when you are calling on the names of God, if there's lies going on about you, you can just think of the name of God as infinite truth, divine truth. You keep contemplating divine truth, nothing but truth can stand in the presence of that. Divine love, perfect love literally casts out all fear. If you're afraid, then you need to consider the idea of God as perfect love. You won't be afraid anymore if you can consider that and you can make that your meditation. The idea of perfect love. There's perfect law, divine law. There are no laws but God's. You are under no laws but God's. And God's laws cannot be disobeyed except for in the realm of a hallucination, which is what this world is. So if you start thinking in terms of God's laws, you start contemplating God's laws for yourself, then the laws of this world that are hallucinations start to dissolve right in front of your eyes, and that includes whatever this problem is. All of this is come upon us, yet we have not forgotten thee, neither have we dealt falsely in thy covenant. The covenant that you have with God is that cause and effect are the bottom line law of the universe. And that if you have effects that you don't like, then your causes are errant. And if you turn to God and allow God to be the cause in any situation, you will be delivered from any negative aspects of that situation. And that's the covenant. And if you forget that, or if you deal falsely with that, you're going to get what you get. But the good news is all you have to do is remember that, and then you're back right on the beam. Our heart is not turned back, neither have our steps declined from thy way. You could put that on a little post-it and carry it around. Anytime you get upset or nervous about whatever this is, you could put it in the first person if you wanted to and say, my heart is not turned back, neither have my steps declined from thy way. And since that's true, you have nothing to worry about. Though thou hast sore broken us in the place of dragons and covered us with the shadow of death. There again, we never want to take responsibility for our own problems. Oh, it must be God. Look what you did, God. You have sore broken us in the place of dragons, and you've covered me with the shadow of death. No, God did not do that. That's our projection. And the Psalms have a lot of that projection in there. And the reason why they do is because we have to notice that. We have to remember, wait a minute, God didn't will this problem. God didn't create this problem. I don't know what created this problem, but I know that there's at least a little part of me that's keeping this problem alive, and I'm willing to use that to pivot. to call in infinite intelligence in the place of that. If we have forgotten the name of our God or stretched out our hands to a strange God, shall not God search this out? For he knoweth the secrets of the heart. Forgetting the name of God and stretching out your hands to a strange God is what we do all day long. I don't want to think of infinite intelligence. I want to think in terms of how I can't pay this bill. I don't want to think of divine love. I just want to think about how that person is so mean, right? Those are strange gods rather than thinking of the name of God. It's really that simple. People want to turn it into mythology and say, oh, it's because they're calling on Isis instead of Jehovah. It has nothing to do with that. Absolutely zero to do with that. God does not care what you call it. It's the quality that makes a difference. If you're meditating on how bad everything is, you are worshiping a strange God. You're not worshiping one of the names of God. You're not worshiping the qualities of the divine. So God searches that out and knows what's in your heart because God creates you. God's not going to punish you for that, but God has to sit and wait patiently while you punish yourself through the law of cause and effect that you are misusing, which was that forgetting the covenant that they talked about before. God can't go against God's own laws, but God can wait for you to say, I don't want to go against God's laws anymore. And then when you do that, then God can undo all the consequences for you. Yea, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. So it's true that when you start thinking of everything else but God, when you give your allegiance, when you worship something, to worship something is to work for something, is to contemplate something, is to be ensconced in something, is to give your allegiance and attention to something. And so if you're spending your days thinking about how awful, and you're not giving much thought to infinite intelligence, infinite love, divine law, all of those things, you get what you get. You are counted as sheep for the slaughter. You're killed all the day long. And it doesn't need to be that way, but God can't save you from that until you change your mind, because God will not go against God's law. It would be like saying, oh, somebody accidentally fell off a roof and they're super important. God, can you save them? Can you suspend the laws of gravity for that person because they're important? No, the law of gravity works for everybody in this world. Everybody that touches the stove gets burned. Everybody gets the same laws. So you have to work within those laws. Awake, why sleepest thou, O Lord? Arise, cast us not off forever. Now, that's a wonderful depiction of what happens to us when things aren't working for us. We think that God's asleep at the switch. It must be God's fault. Stupid God. Why are you asleep, God? What's wrong with you, God? God's not casting you off. God's not asleep. God is being patient. God's waiting for you. The ball is literally in your court. You do your part, and God will never fail to do God's part. But you've got to get your mind aligned to those qualities of the divine rather than to the problem. Wherefore hidest thou face and forgettest our affliction and our oppression? No, God did not forget about your affliction and your oppression. And God does not want you to be afflicted, nor does God want you to be oppressed. But God can do nothing for you that God cannot do through you. So it's up to you. The ball is in your court. For our soul is bowed down to the dust, and our belly cleaveth unto the earth. Yeah. And it's good to recognize that. It's good to recognize how bad something is so that you can get sick of it, so that you finally change your mind about it. God's sitting there at the ready, waiting, but you have to make that move. Arise for our help and redeem us for thy mercy's sake. God does not have to arise, you do. God's not down, you are. So you must arise. You must change your mind. You must say, I'm going to think about the names of God instead of this problem. I'm not going to be consumed with this problem. I'm not going to worship this problem. I'm going to worship the source of the solution of this problem instead. And again, to worship means to work for. So what work are you doing for the solution of this problem? The only work you need to do is the work in your mind. And if other things need to be done in the physical realm, you'll be shown, you'll be guided, it'll be obvious, but you got to get your mind straight first, and that's what the psalm is all about doing. So just keep coming back to this psalm each and every day until you start to get a sense of peace and certainty that your problem is solved. And once you get that sense that everything is working out and you don't worry about it anymore, that's an indicator to you from your deep mind that your spell has taken and you don't have to work on it anymore. You don't have to keep coming back to the psalm anymore. You can let it go, and it's all a matter of time. Thank you so very much for joining me today. Until next time, blessed be.